And good day, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to another live Xanadu Gallery online critique group session. Today is Wednesday, September 29th, 2021. Good to be here with you in another Wednesday session. Just quickly, we're going to jump right in, but quickly as we get started, this is my last week in Pine Top. We're winding down for the summer season here. I'll be packing up this weekend and heading back to Scottsdale. And then next week, be getting up and geared and running in Scottsdale. And so it's going to be a little bit of a crazy week next week. And so for that reason, there will be no Wednesday broadcast next week. It'll be 2 weeks from now that we're back together. And I believe, that'll be the second week. So it'll be another artist review. And we'll definitely look forward to having you in that session, but no session next week. Don't panic when you don't see a notification, or if you try and sign on Wednesday and there's nobody here. That is intentional. So with that, let's jump into our critique today. I'm delighted to welcome Doug Motel, who's joining us from New York. Doug, I'm going to have you unmute yourself and welcome you to the session. Thanks for joining us.
I'm so happy to be here amongst your wonderful community. Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Well, let's start, Doug, with as we are wont to do, let's start with a little bit of background. Tell us a little bit about, where you're from, how you came to be interested in art. I know your path has led you many different directions. So let's just talk a little bit about your story.
Yeah, I mean, I really can't remember a time when I wasn't drawing. And I kind of quickly developed a sort of identity as that kid who can draw, within our little town and within the community. And I became almost like troublingly obsessed with it. I would sometimes draw like 20 to 30 portraits in a day. And finally, I convinced my parents when I was 11, I convinced them to send me to private art training. And so I studied with this really wonderful woman who lived sort of in our general area. And she actually was a Japanese sumi painting expert, but she taught me everything. I studied with her for a couple of years through, my childhood.
And where was this, Doug? Where did you grow up?
So yeah, this was Atlantic City, New Jersey.
In New Jersey.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Atlantic City, New Jersey, a block from the beach. And I spent a lot of time on the beach, a lot of time with the water. So I just became really, she taught me about perspective, and then we would, do a lot of emphasis on watercolor, because that was really where I was drawn, and it was clear that was where I was really interested, but we covered all kinds of medium. And then when I was 12, I started lying my age so that I could get into some art shows for, older people. And I was encouraged because I actually, I won some, placements, some ribbons and stuff like that. And that really kind of solidified my sense of myself as that kid who could paint and draw. And but then I discovered the theater. I discovered the theater when I was 13, and by the time I was 17, I was really doing it really professionally, doing professional theater. And then when I was 18, actually before I was 18, I literally just dropped out of high school, even though I was going to an art high school. I dropped out of high school and I moved to New York City to write and act in the theater.
And so a career develops for you in the theater, and as that's happening, is art still in your life? Are you still pursuing it in some ways, or has the theater completely taken over?
No. The theater was in the front of what I was sort of, pushing out into the world, but then I would come home and draw. And I really just, I discovered stippling when I was 16. And that's really all I did for decades, was just stippling. And people would, sometimes, people that I knew in showbiz, I moved to Hollywood, and, and then, people like Barbara Streisand and songwriters like Mary Gauthier, people like that would buy, or hear, or people would get gifts, or, but it wasn't anything that I really, tried to do, because I felt that it was a conflict with the other forms of art. I now realize that it all comes from the same place, and and my plays were all aiming for the same thing that my artwork is aiming for. Yeah, I was still always, I couldn't stop drawing, but it was mostly just pen and ink and stippling. Pretty much that was it.
Yeah, I want to come back. I think it's interesting that you mentioned that it comes from a similar place, and I think as we look at your work, I'm going to want to have you talk a little bit more about inspiration in that. But let's jump in and do that. And this first image that we're going to look at is an image, and it'll take me just a second to get it up here. So talk to us a little bit about, we're going to look at 5 pieces. Talk to us about both kind of the inspiration and maybe a little bit of technique. And obviously this first one is speaking to that, as you mentioned, the stippling and that work. And so tell us a little bit about the work.
Yeah, so I was always kind of interested in, I've always been very interested in the 20s. The 1920s, I thought it was an interesting time, the way people were busting out of, corsets and constrictions of the Gilded Age, and then suddenly the 20s just seemed like a big shift, and it's just always fascinated me. So I did a whole series of portraits of people from the 1920s. And this is actually a portrait of Gloria Swanson, and I was really interested in her because I found out that she was a film star. She was a huge film star in the 20s, and she was the first woman to demand to have ownership of the content that she was creating. And she was actually having an affair with Joseph Kennedy, and JFK's father, and Joseph Kennedy was the one who told her, these men are owning, all this work that you're doing. You should own it. So she wound up, that kind of set her up much better than a lot of other women who were sort of used by Hollywood for their ability to draw an audience and then discarded. So I was interested in her. And I wanted to, do a portrait of her. But like I said, it was from a series of 1920s people from the 20s.
And so, if you look back over kind of your creative process, how many pen and ink drawings or works that are kind of in this vein, how many of them would you guess roughly that you've created?
Maybe 1,000.
Yeah, a lot. And I asked that question because then we're going to look at the next piece, and obviously we're going to shift gears pretty dramatically, right? A very different subject matter, very different style, different medium. And so talk to us how we go from, this work, very detailed, representational, to something that is much more abstracted, and I would say even your technique makes it be somewhat sculptural in nature as well.
Right. Someone wrote, "I love the drawing of the dot form." So yeah, everyone loves the dots. So that sort of points an arrow to how difficult this was for me to step into painting in this way, because my ego really loves the response of people doing a commission for someone and having them be like, "Wow, that looks exactly like my son or my grandmother," or whatever. It was a struggle for me at first, but I got to a point during the pandemic so just to backtrack a little bit, I managed to put together in my work as a speaker and as a storyteller a really exciting year in 2020. I had performances scheduled for Hawaii, a month in Portugal. I was to go to Cuba, all over the U.S. Like, it was the calendar that I dreamed of. And then in March of 2020, literally within 10 days, every single event was canceled. And I, allowed myself to have a pity party on that for about a day. And then I just thought, okay, right, maybe this is my chance to paint again. And it also coincided with discovering Hilma Afklint, who many of you know is really the grandmother of European abstract painting, abstract expressionism. She was very influenced by Eastern philosophy, as all the early Kandinsky and all the early abstract painters were. For them, it was kind of like a spiritual movement. The idea was they were acknowledging that at the end of the 19th century, there was so much focus on the material, and that they wanted to begin to paint some things that did not go through the mind and the material. So no people, places, or things, just gestures and color and shape to see if it could ignite a feeling that kind of goes past the sort of front of the brain, if you will. And when I found that out, I thought, wow, what an interesting relief it could be for me to not have to so carefully draw in pencil and then do the basic dots, and then when the ink dries, erase all of the pencil and just go dots. And because in the stippling work, literally you could have one dot too many on the tip of someone's nose, and it changes the whole shape of the nose. It doesn't look like them anymore. And there was something about that challenge that I really loved, but I can't quite explain why, and I probably will, because it's still so recent. It's only been 10 months since I painted that painting, and that is the first abstract painting I've ever painted. And in the past, so it's still too soon, but I can say that there was something so important for me about putting paint down and just being still and just seeing, I wonder what the paint's going to do. I wonder what the paint wants to do, and having no sketches, no prep, no pre-planned composition, almost like maybe I'm doing this just for myself, So that is really the evolution of it, I guess. It coincided with the pandemic, and especially the colors. It's just the same palette. It's a greenish blue, and sort of a coral color, and it just triggers for me the sense of calm of the seas. I was supposed to be working in Hawaii because my ancestors are Hawaiian. I love Hawaii. The first thing I do when I get off of the plane is to go into the sea. There were all these beaches in Portugal that we were supposed to go to, obviously the Caribbean and Cuba, and painting these paintings where I didn't have to know what was going to happen. All I had to know was the colors that I wanted to see wound up becoming like a remedy, and that's what I started calling them, remedy. I call it the Remedy series.
And so it's interesting. I mean, we can see in this work, you've mentioned it. I mean, in some ways, it's a maybe not a polar opposite, but it's a very different technique, a very different process. It's drawing from past experience creatively. You mentioned that you studied watercolor, and so here you are coming back to watercolor. Grew up by the ocean. Here's the ocean again. And so, and talk a little bit too then about, as you begin creating these, and you're then thinking about, and let me just show a couple of images of the mounting, kind of what your approach was to thinking about the effect you wanted to achieve and the way you wanted the work to be presented.
Yeah, well, it's very interesting, actually. I knew that I wanted these paintings to float on the wall. So actually, I have one kind of here. Can you kind of see that?
Yeah, let me go back over to you here. There we go.
So what I started doing was building molds and pouring them with resin, and then putting the paintings inside, and then pouring more resin on top of them, and then putting a piece of 1 inch thick piping behind it, so that when it goes on the wall, it actually is off of the wall. And because to me, it wasn't just the colors, it was also the floating feeling was what, really important to me.
And so how did you come to what drew you to resin? What experience had you had that kind of made you think that that was a possibility, and to kind of start exploring it?
I don't remember. Um, uh, I don't remember what happened. I discovered art resin somehow, some way, and I did first just started pouring it on top of the work that were on, because initially they were on you know um, a cradled wood, and then I would just tape the edges, pour the resin, and then they look really shiny and really cool. And that was sort of like the gateway of it. But then I got really interested in this concept of having them float against the wall. Um, but then there was an interesting turn of events. I am a big fan of your blog. I have learned so much these past 10 months. The information that you give away is so generous, and it's so clear that you really spent a lot of time thinking about this. And one person had given a comment, and I really liked his comment, and so I wrote to him. His name is Ray Wiggs, and he has a gallery in Provincetown. And I wrote to him and I said that I liked his comment on your blog, and I think I gave him a link, and he wrote me this really long email. And I was completely blown away. He had taken so much time. He looked through all my work, and he gave me such interesting feedback. And he told me he thought that the resin was a mistake. He thought that it was a mistake for me to be using these pieces in this way, in this mold. He said that there's going to be there's the potential of yellowing. There's resistance from galleries, and he gave me a kind of impressive argument, and he gave me resources. Told me about other people that were, for instance, he sent me to an artist who was painting on plexiglass. So I shifted, actually. If you go back to the picture that I'm holding, that's actually that's a recent piece that is painted on plexiglass. Actually, that particular piece is on canvas that I've glued onto the plexiglass. But now I have pieces that are where I apply watercolor ground on top of the plexiglass. I do create a border, which the artist that he referred to me doesn't do, but I created a border and I still use the backing so that they still float. But he had suggested things. He suggested pricing to me. He suggested sizes, and so now I've gone way bigger. I have I have plexiglass pieces that are 5 feet by 5 feet, and it's still obviously an evolution. I was hesitant to give up this idea of the floating, but I feel like the plexiglass seems to be working really well. So I've gotten I've gotten a lot of terrific mentorship from knowing you, Jason.
Well, thank you. And before everyone here starts emailing Ray, let's be considerate of his time and no, but I love that. And let me just say that that is one of the things that I've really loved about the blog, is that it really has engendered a real community where there is a lot of that interaction, both in the comments and then conversations that are taken offline, and it's a great opportunity. And I think, Doug, what I would like to do now is open it up for some conversation. And we have a little bit of a unique opportunity here in that you are in the early phases of exploring your work and still evolving and developing the work. And what I'd like to do is get some comments from those of you here who have joined us in the session. First, just your reaction to the work and what Doug is doing, and then maybe also just some thoughts. If you could go back to yourself a year into the process of creating your work, what advice might you give to yourself, and by extension, then what advice might you give to Doug? So let me open it up. If you want to hop in, throw your hand up in front of the camera or click on the hand icon. I know I've put a little pressure on you now, but if I don't get volunteers, I will bring you in. Gay, let me start with you. And good morning.
Okay. This is just me personally, but I am so glad that you're not doing those dotty pictures anymore.
Oh.
And they were wonderful. Don't get me wrong. They were great. But the new stuff is, I think, fantastic. And I think it's free, it's professional, it's the beginning. That's the thing I want you to remember. This is the start. And you've got a lot of ways to go and a lot of fun doing it. I think the floating, you're welcome. The floating thing is fascinating to me. I did just put a question in the chat saying, how do you preserve the surface? Because plexi is easy to scratch and do things like that. But other than that, that's what I'm saying. And I'm just trying to encourage you to keep going. Just throw into it any color. I did see recalling the dotting on one of those. You have those little circles in, and I saw some tiny little dots behind. So you have got that technique that you can bring back in. This flows. This is so much fun. So I really hope you have fun carrying on.
I did leave out, you just reminded me, Gay, I left out a little, thank you very much. I did leave out a little story. I did have, before the pandemic, I was in a little gallery, and one of the fellow artists who I didn't even know, she turned to me and she said, do you mind if I give you some feedback? That's
famous
always
last words, right?
Right, exactly. It's always like, you don't want to be like, no. So I said, sure. And she said, it's clear that you know how to be a draftsman, and all of these, drawings, and they look exactly like the person, and it's great, but I don't see you in here at all. And I felt so bad. I felt so embarrassed. Here I was standing with all my work, and then I let it. I said, "Wow, that really hurts." And she was like, "Sorry, I know. I just kind of tell it like I see it." And then I realized that she was absolutely right. She said, "What you're doing is you're taking other people's photographs, and you're drawing them." And and I realized that, I was really glad that I did that. It was very meditative. I liked the end result, but she was right. I wasn't really in there. I mean, the way in which I am in these paintings right now, it is, you said, Jason, it's almost like the opposite. No, but it is the opposite. It's completely opposite. I mean, these paintings now are just nothing but the way I feel. It's not from my head and the sort of, careful thing. And as far as the, the question specifically, Gay, plexiglass, you have to be careful with it. I actually wear cotton gloves, to clean them because they will get your fingerprints on them. Barbie says, I am a water person. I am totally a water person. I keep the, you can, I do varnish them. I spray them with a high gloss varnish to protect the work. And then the plexi is pretty resilient. You can use, fantastic on it. You can, keep it clean in that way. But yes, you got to be careful,
and I'll mention I've worked with over the years. I've worked with several artists who, one in particular I'm thinking of, who did reverse painting on plexiglass, and it was she was using a high gauge heavy duty plexi, and you had to be careful, yes, but there's some qualities there and some technical aspects of the plexiglass that lend themselves well to creating art if the proper care is given. And so it was a little bit of an education process on our part, explaining that Windex was not a good idea on the plexi, but with just a little education, we were able to do that, and we sold a lot of her work over the years.
Yeah, picking 5 paintings was really, really hard for me. I have just so many paintings in these past 10 months. There must be 50 of these paintings.
And Doug, have you started to, have you had an opportunity to show this work to the public and start to get some reaction and feedback?
Very, very little. I just started, posting, like I was in I've just started sharing them a little bit, and people have been buying them. Strangers, from just posting them on social media. So I really consider this first year to be my research and development.
Yeah.
Figuring out how to keep being able to paint in this way so quickly and so honestly, but now I'm stepping into a place where, okay, my wife and my daughter are being very patient, but it's like, Daddy's paintings are everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, there comes a point, right?
Yeah. And not only that, but I really did paint them thinking, oh, wow, these blues and greens, they make my shoulders drop and they make me take a deeper breath. And if I could have somebody come into their office, their home office or their home, and and just have that same sensation, I would be thrilled. I've sold 7 or 8 of these paintings so far, and the people have written to me and said precisely that they come home and they see these blues and greens and the oceany kind of vibe, and they calm down. And then I found out that there's a whole science to the color blue that triggers sense of calm and peace. And so, I want people to own them. So yes, I have to figure out how
the next obvious step.
Yeah.
Let me go ahead, and is there anyone else? Terry, I see you there, and anyone else who'd like to jump in?
Yeah, I was just going to say, Doug, I don't know if these are pieces. I went to your social media sites, and I can't tell if the pieces are staged or if they're in a client's home. Either way, they are very effective. I do not understand abstraction very well. I do understand your sentiment behind it and love it, but having that staged lets me see the effect it would have on me in a home or office. And I think the staging is your best friend.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that comment, Terry, because I go back and forth. I do use those different software applications that project your work onto a wall, because honestly these are kind of hard to photograph because of the reflective surface. And also, I am painting at a bigger scale now, and then some of these pieces don't necessarily reflect that, so I cheat, and I make them look bigger than they really are for these, presentations. And I sort of felt a little bad about it. And somebody, on the, how the interwebs can be, somebody was like, "Why are all these paintings in an IKEA store?" And then he wanted to know, more and more about me and IKEA and stuff. And I had to say, okay, can we end this now? Because I don't even shop at IKEA. But thank you. I appreciate that. Ultimately, the conclusion that I've come to is I think I painted these paintings to be seen on a wall. And so for me to show them without being on a wall doesn't really do them justice in the way that like my portraits can. You don't necessarily have to see my portraits. And in fact, considering they're so detailed and the dots that I used were so tiny, it actually doesn't show the work best if it's being shown on a wall, really. So yeah, I've made the decision. It's a little bit of a cheat because I do sometimes change the sizes, but I am painting at that size now. I am prepared to deliver that to someone. And I'm also...
That was the question I had. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think kind of building off of that, Doug. I mean, I do think that your work is going to show very well in a gallery space. That having a grouping of the work, some at larger scale and some at smaller scale, is going to be very effective. And this is a conversation we often have here, but I do think that, looking for that opportunity and finding some gallery partners where people can come in and experience the work and see it, on a wall in a gallery space. I mean, it's going to show very well in that kind of setting. And I would anticipate that you would not have trouble finding galleries that will be interested in showing this work.
That's so great. I'd love to be in a gallery in Scottsdale.
Right. I mean, it's always a good place to start. But yeah, no, seriously. I mean, it's pretty easy. It is easy for an artist in your position saying, okay, here I am 10 months, a year into creating this new body of work. And there's been some experimentation and I've been working on format and those are things obviously that have to be worked through, but you want to be careful not to get into a kind of circular trap where you feel like, I'm not quite there yet. I want to keep developing this and working on this and I want to figure this or that out. And I would encourage you, I think you've got a body of work that, putting a portfolio together that you could very quickly find galleries interested in showing it and start to get some sales. And even though the work would continue to develop, the feedback that you would be getting from your gallery owners and from collectors seeing the work is going to give you some really great direction in developing the work further. In other words, you're no longer creating it in a vacuum of, just your own experience and how it's affecting you, but now you're starting to get some outside feedback and that can be very positive. And, in most cases, I'm encouraging artists, don't wait. Let's be gearing up to get the work out there now, sooner rather than later.
Yeah. I'm a little still intimidated by the idea of how do I ship all of these big, pieces of plexiglass to a gallery. How does that all work? I'm excited about it, the learning curve of it, but I'm intimidated by it a little bit. And
yes, that's a great point, and that is very natural. And again, I would say there is nothing like having a gallery in Scottsdale or San Francisco or Florida say to you, Doug, we want your work. Get it here. Boy, suddenly now that becomes not a theoretical question, but a pragmatic question. And there is nothing when it comes to shipping and logistics that we can't figure out. I always have an open door. If you get that opportunity, when you get that opportunity, reach out to me and I'll have some suggestions for you. The simplest one is find somebody locally who's got some experience shipping, and partner with them. Say, hey, here's the situation. Here it's somewhat delicate. How would you recommend we go about shipping these? And no matter how delicate your artwork is, I can guarantee you an experienced shipper has dealt with things that are much more delicate than that. And so they can help you kind of work through those issues.
I guess mostly I'm concerned about the cost.
Fair enough. Yep. And yes, there is going to be a cost. Maybe you work at first thinking, okay, maybe I don't start shipping my 72 by 30s to galleries. Maybe I'm doing some moderate size pieces, some 36 40s or 36 squares. I can go through a little bit of a learning curve there and figure things out and then scale that up. And, galleries are going to be open. They're not necessarily going to insist on having the largest pieces first. A lot of times a gallery likes to start with something more moderately sized,
Oh,
get some
great.
sales going, and then work your way up. And so, definitely questions to be answered and things to work through, but there's not a single question that you can have about logistics and shipping that can't be answered.
Great. Well, I appreciate all of that. And I also heard what you're saying about not waiting. Yeah, so I mean, actually, that very first, the first abstract in the slide, the one after the portrait of Gloria Swanson, was I had posted on Facebook and on my fan page, not my personal profile, and said, hey, I'm kind of doing these, paintings. And then some woman said, oh, I want one of those. And I was like, great. And she actually lived in the vicinity. So I brought a couple of them to her, and she chose that one, which is the first slide. And that was actually, like I said, that was the first painting that I did. So yeah, I feel like even from the get-go, just coming out of the gate, the stuff that was sort of, kind of the visual language, if you will, felt, ready for other people too to want to have it.
Yeah. Talk a little bit, Doug, about how you're thinking about pricing the work and how we've developed your approach to pricing.
Yeah, well, you helped me with this. And ultimately...
it was a leading question, Doug, I admit it.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely just felt for this, just the sense of sanity, I had to price things by the square inch. And I decided that given the materials that I'm using, I use, it's really hard to see here, but in this picture in particular, I use this watercolor ground that is, it's cold press watercolor ground from Tri-Art in Canada, and it's this thick paste, and it goes on like stucco. It is so thick, and when it dries, it literally turns any surface into a piece of like 500-pound cold press watercolor paper. It's absolutely extraordinary. And so I've begun to mix the watercolor, like liquid watercolors and powdered watercolors, with this watercolor ground, and begin to paint with, a palette knife and stuff like that. That watercolor ground is very expensive because I need like a lot of it. And plexiglass, given the pandemic and the run on plexiglass, is now triple the price. So I've settled on $2.50 a square inch for right now, until hopefully I get to a place where I'm running out of paintings.
Yeah, no, and I mean, I will just say that price range fits squarely in a range that sells very well in the broader market. It's a great place to start. That $1.75 to $3 per square inch, there are many other factors that are going to come into play on pricing: subject matter and medium and style and that kind of thing. But I've done a lot of market research on price points, and that range is not a bad place to start. There is a broad audience out there, and I don't think, looking at this work and the style and the medium, I would anticipate that you're not going to find a lot of resistance to that price point. I've done a lot of talking, and we've let Doug talk, but let me get anyone else in. We just got a few moments left. Anyone else want to hop in with some additional comments for Doug, or reaction to the work, or suggestions? Deborah Perlman, let me see if I can get you. There we go. Good morning.
Hi, good morning. Doug, I really like the work you're doing. And I wanted to share some of my own experience about making changes. to the work you're working on. It happened to me about a year ago as well.
What was it about a year ago that, it seems
Gee,
like there
what?
were a lot of changes going on, right?
For sure. I did experience a devastating personal loss. My son died. That probably somewhere did affect me
Absolutely.
tremendously. But it was more than that. And I was going from realistic. I was taking my photographs that I was doing of the South Florida landscape. And I was actually putting them sort of like as a sculptural landscape. So they were unusual and different, but they were pretty realistic. And basically now I'm going to show you working on stuff like this.
Wow.
And it brought out, it freed me. It freed me. It was so interesting going from something so realistic to something that was so abstract. It was a really great experience, and I'm really excited about it. And just a couple of other quick things is that I'm also having issues because pieces like this are sculptural, they're bas relief. And I have decided to frame them like this because I think that they should pop out from the wall and be naked without plexiglass. But there are issues in terms of shipping and all of that. I did find some great art packaging from Uline. So if you want to take a look there, they have boxes that are foam lined and that sort of thing. I built some of the price for the box into the price of the piece, and then had a separate price for shipping that I thought was fairly reasonable. So I kind of split it out in terms of materials versus the actual shipping charge. So I just wanted to share that. And one other tip was I use artplacer.com to place my art in different settings.
Yep.
I think it's really effective. And awesome. I have a whole section on my website called Living. And under Living, you see the art in living spaces. So it gives people that idea of what it would look like on the wall. And I did put them to scale. So, and they're fairly small. So, they're in small, intimate little spaces. So just wanted to share
awesome.
that.
Yeah, Deborah, thank you for those insights. And again, that's what's awesome about the community is you can reach out and boy, any questions that we have, someone else has already worked through some aspect of those questions and found, usually by trial and error, usually by making a lot of mistakes, have found ways to solve those. So don't hesitate to reach out that way.
I see a couple of questions. Do you want me to answer them?
Yeah, Doug, let's do it. We've got just a few. We're actually a little bit over, but let's just quickly take those. Yeah,
so the weight is not the same as with the canvas Tahoe art. Plexiglass is heavier than a piece of canvas, considerably. I too use Art Placer. I also use this app on my phone called Art Rooms. It's called Art Rooms, and it actually does a really nice job. Because I've been using my phone. This Galaxy phone is actually a really, really great high-res.
Yeah, amazing camera. Photos, right?
Yeah. Attaching the hanging system. So I attach these square tubes. They're basically just imagine acrylic tubes, but square. I glue them on the back of the piece with resin. And yes, gay, the plexi does scratch.
Yeah, awesome.
It doesn't change color as it deepens and ages. It's funny, Cindy. I was told no by the art resin company, but this painting, which was done, about 9 months ago, is already starting to yellow a little bit.
Yeah, so
I can see it.
Yeah, and that. Boy, there's so much we could unpack here, and unfortunately, we are out of time, and I've got to get to a gallery opening. But Doug, I really want to thank you for coming on and sharing your work with us. It's such a great opportunity to kind of get to see new art and get your obvious excitement about what you're doing and the work that you're creating. And I would just encourage us, I also just have to say here as we sign out that today we've been talking about going through changes and doing something new. And I understand that's a temptation and something that a lot of us explore. I would just throw out the flip side of that some of us, you don't necessarily have to go through a radical change in the work that you're doing, there are many paths to finding fulfillment in creating your work, to finding a market for your work. And sometimes it does require a radical change and going in a different direction. And sometimes it requires a long, consistent, persistent pursuit of your art form. And both of those pathways are valid. And so we're going to definitely be exploring and talking more about all of that. But thank you all for joining us. Doug, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your work.
Thank you for inviting me. It was a great little boost. I needed
Yeah,
it.
awesome. And of course, we'll look forward to staying in touch and keeping up with your work. Follow Doug on his socials. Everyone be sure and hop over there. And which social platform are you most active on, Doug?
Yeah, definitely. Right now, it's Instagram, and so it's Instagram. It's at dougmotel.art, and I'm trying to be good at dougmotelart. And my website, dougmotel.art, I'm trying to be pretty good at keeping that up to date with work, but it's not so much.
Awesome. Well, we'll keep in touch and keep up to date. And thanks for joining us, everyone. Again, we won't be here next week, but be sure and pop back in.